but it looks like it is in fact going to happen, and we might depart as early as next Sunday. So it's possible I won't be here next Sunday. It's also possible I could be away as long as 6 weeks. So I'm going to talk to Brother Andrew Coffey today about possibly filling in there while I'm gone. He sent me some notes, some stuff that he thought might be applicable to this discussion. And earlier this week, and I went back and I said, not only are they applicable, because they tie in nicely with what we've just been talking about in terms of education, but I think it also provides a good segue into some future segments that I got planned later on. So I think his intent was for me to use that information in my future lessons. I think we're going to ask him to present him himself because he's pretty good at that. So that's just kind of as a heads up that I may be traveling here soon, maybe as long as 6 weeks. So just in what it's worth category. Let's welcome everybody and those who are streaming and open with prayer. Lord Jesus, once again we thank you for giving us an opportunity and the privilege to come together as a body of believers to discuss these things concerning your word, Lord. And once again we ask that you would open our hearts and give us those things that we have need of, each of us individually, that we might come away better equipped to serve you. For we ask it in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. So I see we have some visitors this morning as well. I'll welcome you aboard. I owe you an explanation probably that we are in the midst of a fairly long series here that we started last October on, it's called Life Planning in View of the Signs of the Times. And the segment we're on right now has to do with man's knowledge and education, geared mostly towards the young people and having to make some of the decisions that they're making going through their high school years. We lost the sound, Brother Roger. And into perhaps college or the workforce or wherever they go after high school. So I've spent a good bit of time presenting a bunch of statistics, health and welfare of the education system in the United States. And whereas it may sound as though I'm very critical of the college idea, and they're trying to present it as though it's an exclusion, right, of the college idea. I'm trying to present to the young people, rather than get them hung up on a particular statistical number of how things are going one way or the other, rather a broader view of kind of the health and welfare in general, and the notion that there are options out there. Contrary to what the education system likes to tell you, that when you get done with high school, your only real option is to go on to college, get a degree, and they're promising you that that degree will get you this great job and super salary and long career, and you live happily ever after. Never amount to anything, can't get a job, can't support a family, the world starts rotating and you all fall off. So I'm trying to challenge that notion that there are alternatives out there, and they're perfectly acceptable alternatives. And in fact, the big picture is that the education we're supposed to be going after is more knowledge of God rather than more of man's knowledge, right? Not that some of this man's knowledge doesn't help you earn a living, it does, okay? But overall, that so-called college, I'll call it classroom education thing, is a very small part of what you need in terms of overall education in the eyes of God, right? So that's kind of where we are. And I left it last week with some fairly troubling statistics perhaps, and perhaps this thing isn't working. Oh, I guess I do need to plug it in. By the way, I'm an engineer in the technology business, but a forgetful one sometimes too. Okay, so it might have been, I left you with this thought. So why do I want to go to college at all? I mean, this doesn't look so good, right? 50% of all bachelor's degrees that come out go either unemployed or underemployed. 13 to 20% of people who come out with a bachelor's degree actually go to work in the field they studied, right? It looks a little scary. So why do I want to go to college at all? Well, so the response was, maybe you don't, but there are some alternatives. Stay tuned. And so what I thought I'd go over this week, a little ambitious perhaps, but it just occurred to me one day as I was kind of preparing some of this stuff. If I'm looking at my own family, that's my siblings, my children, okay, and the choices that they've made and where they've gone and what's become of them, right, over the years, those statistics of that particular little group line up very, very well with the national statistics, right? So I thought I would share with you some of these alternatives and hopefully kind of a practical sort of a way not theoretical. These are people I actually know. Okay, I've actually tracked their business, right, from start to finish, or from start to wherever they are today. So I thought I'd share some of that with you and just kind of give you some concrete examples of what some alternatives might be. Okay, beginning with my siblings. This is my older sister. I know the first response is, older than you, Brother Ken? I mean, is there anybody really that's older than? Yes, yes. And she's very old, okay? But she'd probably slap me for saying that. But this is Christine, my older sister. She graduated from high school and got a one-year certificate. She went through a one-year training program for a license to be an occupational therapist assistant. It was, like I say, 1 year in school. It wasn't very expensive. She was able to pay for it as she went along, right? She spent more than 40 years in that business. She worked at the University of Missouri Columbia Medical Institute, or the University Hospital, for a good while. And then she joined this company that designs wheelchairs, special wheelchairs for handicapped folks with special needs. So she figures out what the needs are. She figures out which widgets on the wheelchair need to be where, and designs the whole thing, sends it away, has the company build it, comes back, and she trains up the person on how to use it. Okay. So it's a state license and a national certification. 1 year course. Her husband was an RN. He passed away a few years ago, but they've done very, very well. The house is long since paid for. They've raised two young girls, right? And she's now retired, enjoying her grandchildren, okay? No degree. Introduced this ruffian last week, right? That is in response to the question, well, are there people out there that actually get what the system promises, right? And I would have to say I'm one of them, right? So I can't say it's all gloom and doom and it never happens. Went into college directly out of high school within 30 days, 4 years full-time on campus at a military academy. Some people wouldn't call it a campus. It is a little different from the traditional campus, but we call it the yard, right? But 4 years full-time in college, employed the day I graduated, right? Trained in actually two fields. One was to be a professional officer of the Naval Service, to use their mantra, right? But the other is a mechanical engineer, right? And I've actually worked in both fields for over 40 years. So yes, there are people who get what the system promised, right? And this is an alternative. I'll call it the traditional college route. Next younger sister, pictured lower right here. We've talked about her before, but she has a secretarial certificate, they call it. It's actually equivalent to an associate's degree from the Northeast Missouri State University in Kirksville, Missouri. She got this certificate as a legal secretary, and then got a job as the executive secretary to the Chancellor, University of Missouri, and worked that job for more than 35 years, and she's now retired. This is a guy that was there most of the time. That's the Chancellor, became a very close family friend. I've talked about him before, and had the chance to talk university and education politics, if you will, with him and others. It was rather enlightening for me. One of the reasons I'm sort of on this high horse with you, right? But so she did a whole career based on this 2-year certificate, did great with it, raised 4 kids. She and her husband got a house on 10 acres just outside Columbia, Missouri, long since paid for. They're just about to retire. And I'd like to introduce him as well. It's my brother-in-law. His name is Mike. Just what we need is another Mike in this congregation to talk about, but we call him Mikey, right? But Mike has a high school diploma, and as a lot of high school guys might tend to, he was very interested in cars. And so he went to work as an auto mechanic when he got out of high school for this outfit called Woody's Auto Center. My dad was also a lifetime mechanic, and I remember back in Mike's younger years, my dad was critiquing his work all the time, you know. But he would say, you know, the little whelp is pretty good, you know. But he actually turned out to be very good, to the point where he bought the business from his boss, okay? And he has run this business now for many years, and I might have mentioned in the past that a long time ago I bought the family farm I was raised on from my dad so he could retire, right? Obviously I'm not farming it, it's just kind of laying there. It was all sentimental value to me. I just want to keep it in the family. But to my great surprise, about 3 weeks ago, my sister called me and asked me if I'd sell it to her. Okay, and I said, well, I had no intention of selling it. I only own it to keep it in the family. But if I was going to sell it, I would sell it to a family member, right? But they're about to sell this business now, and they're offering me cash for the farm. So they're not doing too bad. In fact, remember last week we talked about this business of earning potential if you're choosing your career, right? The world would like to talk to you about the various kinds of earning potentials for various majors, if you will, and career fields. And but we find statistically that if you're interested in measuring only that, and I'm going to tell you that's not the most important, right? But that's what the world would like to talk about a lot. But the thing that offers the greatest earning potential by far and away is being self-employed, okay? Whether you have a degree or not. And the degree really doesn't matter. And I kind of set Mikey up there as the poster child for that because he's doing way better than most college graduates that I know, okay? Being self-employed, fixing cars. Because guess what? Everybody needs a car. And they need it to work, you know? So just one of those examples. This is my next younger sister, has kind of an interesting story. Lori has a high school diploma. She went to work after she got out of high school at the University Medical Center doing insurance claims, right? And then this new technology came along that nobody had ever heard of before called social media, okay? And she got very interested in this thing. In fact, she became kind of addicted to it, I guess, right? She got but she got pretty good at handling this social media thing. And somebody on the university staff offered her a position to help develop a way to communicate with all of the students. And from the university leadership to the whole student body, about 20,000 kids all over the state, 5 different campuses, and the public, right? So parents and so on and so forth. So she created this thing with social media to have this communication flow and became what was known as the communications director and the public information officer for the University of Missouri. Now, she doesn't have a degree. This program became very, very successful to the point where she was invited to travel all over the country and speak at other universities to try to tell them how to do this kind of thing, right? And the university started getting quite a lot of notoriety out of it. And it was a good thing for them. She had a staff of about 10 people, finally. The university decided because they're getting all this positive press, they were going to start their own department for this thing, a formal thing, and actually start developing curricula for students to learn how to do this kind of thing, right? Until they realized that this person that's in charge kind of built the whole program doesn't have a degree. So now they have this enigma. So I bring this up only to tell you that there are those out there that do have a prejudice about whether you have a degree or not, okay? And probably the foremost place where it exists is that place that sells degrees, which is universities, right? So they wanted to stand up this whole formal department thing, but they got a problem. She doesn't have a degree. So most of their department heads are all PhDs at the university. So it's a long story. It got a little ugly, but at the end of the day, they basically offered her an early retirement from the university if she would just quietly go away so they could put a PhD in charge, okay? She was far from retirement age, but she got a full retirement out of the university for the thing. And she moved on to go to work for the governor's office for the state of Missouri, who wanted to do a similar thing for all the insurance holders in the state, okay? So I share with you a couple of tidbits from her interview with this guy, because she'd had this bad experience at the university, right? Turned out to be a good experience financially. She's doing very well, frankly. But she's interviewing with this guy who wanted to stand up a similar kind of a program for the state of Missouri. And she's going to great pains to make sure he understands she does not have a degree because she doesn't want to go through this problem again, right? And he says, well, I'm not so much interested in the degree. He says, I'm interested in what you've got in your resume here. He says, can you do all these things in this resume? And she goes, yeah. Well, it just turns out that this guy was an alumnus of the University of Missouri. He had a University of Missouri campus magazine on his desk, right? And he goes, I need somebody who can do this. And she goes, that's my product right there. She says, my staff and I built that product right there. And he goes, hired, okay? So she's now doing this for the state of Missouri, okay? So again, just to bring up to you, there are those out there, whether it's justified or not, right? They're going to have a prejudice as to whether or not you have a degree, whether or not you can do the job, okay? So this is my youngest sister, Susan. We've talked about, she covers a lot of territory in this particular discussion, but when she graduated from high school, she started the college at a local college. It's about a quarter mile from where we lived, or where she lived with my parents, Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. It's the home of the Winston Churchill Memorial. Nobody's ever heard of it. That's what puts Fulton, Missouri on the map, that Winston Churchill made his Iron Curtain speech there. So They took this church building from London, moved it to Fulton, and stood it up in his honor. And so that's kind of the claim to fame. But when she graduated from high school, she was a tour guide there at the museum for good loans. Now, of this group that we're talking about, she's the only one that took out the student loans, right? And she took out a bunch of them for the time. It was like $30K all total. She got about 2.5 years into her college career, ran out of money and the ability to borrow more money, and basically had to drop out of college. Went to work for the University of Missouri Police Department doing clerical work, processing tickets and junk like that, right? And then decided to go back in one of the very first distance learning programs that was offered, Thomas Edison State College, Trenton, New Jersey. So she finished her degree with them, took out more student loans, oh, by the way, to finish that degree. And we tease her about, cramming a 4-year degree into 10 years. But she did get her degree, $30,000 in debt. Took her 7 years to pay him off. And she could only do that because she was living at home with mom and dad. Okay, so this degree. But then kind of a tangential story that goes with this is my mom has a high school diploma. She graduated, she worked for a local mom and pop many years until Walmart came to town. And he had to close down the store. She went to work for the University of Missouri, mom, as a bookkeeper for the athletic department, right? So she worked there many years and finally retired. When she retired, Susan took her job, okay? So the point here is that she checks a bunch of boxes here, but student loan thing being one of them, but the other being so-called underemployed, right? So she gets her business degree, but she winds up taking a job that didn't require a degree to begin with, right? But she's making more than the national average in that position, right? So she's making more than a lot of college graduates are making, even though she's in a position that doesn't require a degree. Is that making sense, right? There's an awful lot of that stuff out there, right? So she has a daughter who's graduating from high school next year, who's thinking about college, and her number one recommendation to her daughter is, don't do it the way I did it. Okay, so some of you may remember this fella. This is our oldest son, Jason, right? But, when he was in high school, he became very, very interested in computers, to the point I got him an A+ certification so he could build them and so on. So he was building his own computers when he was in high school, taught himself 7 computing languages, just kind of as a hobby. He kind of liked it. Trust me, I didn't teach him that stuff because I didn't know that stuff. So he graduates, he kind of flounders around for a little while trying to figure out what he wants to do. I finally got him a position with a defense contractor as an apprentice or an internship sort of a thing in software development. And it turns out that his boss was a former Air Force guy, also did not have a college degree, but was in software development. They kind of hit it off. The rest is history. He's doing better than twice the national. He was writing software for a consortium of banks in Tampa, where he was a cybersecurity guy, so he's watching the firewall to see when the hackers try to analyze their attack and figures out if the firewall has any vulnerabilities in it, and if it does, then he patches them up, right, with the software. Unfortunately, that company was a casualty of COVID, so they closed their doors last summer. So he's just moved over to this gaming software company, and he actually wears the title of network engineer. But you get to that point we talked about the past couple of weeks, is worth more than that degree, okay? In fact, it can be significantly more. And I'll give you another example right here. This is Jason's twin brother, Justin, picture with his best friend over here. But we talked about his business a couple of weeks ago, flying aerostats, right? I was working the same program with him here until very recently. By the way, this is an aerostat that's moored properly. This is one that's moored improperly, if you remember that story we had with that thing. But Justin graduated from high school, and he became a Fairfax County cop here in town, right? And got a little disillusioned with how the police force was kind of political, more political than public servant. A general manager for an Outback restaurant, right? For, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. Decided he didn't want to do steak and potatoes for the rest of his life. And so I got him a position with a defense contractor as a logistics technician. And this logistic tech, there's also a kind of an intern sort of a thing, apprenticeship deal. But this company was supporting this aerostat program for the Army and the Navy. deploying aerostats to Afghanistan. And they were offering folks a boatload of money to go and deploy as a contractor and operate these things for physical security for forward operating bases for the military, right? So he wanted some of that money. So he applied for their training program, got it, and it turns out to be it's by the Army, right, to train people up on how to fly these aerostats, right? So this is an example of a vocational school, if you will, right, and training provided by the employer. So he gets his certification from the Army's aerostat school. He deploys, gets his boatload of money, and he comes back home. And he's been with the program ever since. He's now a program manager and flight team leader for aerostats. And kind of an interesting discussion with him is he's now making more than 2.5 times the national average, by the way, of college grads as a PM. Now, he's become a little concerned that maybe he's topping out, right, for his earning potential without a degree. So I went back and did sort of a little analysis of that and figured out that if he went back and got his bachelor's degree today, it would not be worth as much as the experience he already has. Okay, so he's looking at getting his PMP certification, a project management professional certification. And some of you might be familiar with that, but you can kind of study up on your own, pay some money, take the exam, and so on and so forth. There are some places that will give you a crash course in it that's measured maybe in days or weeks or something. But the point is, very short period of time, and if you PMP, in the field that he's in right now, that certification could probably take him somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 a year, right, with the experience that he has. Way better than the college grads are getting, right? And oh, by the way, the Army didn't teach him how to fish. I did that. Okay, he just happens to enjoy it. So this is number 3 son. Some of you might remember, the piano player, right? Has kind of an interesting story as well. He graduated from high school, went to work for a bank. Started out as a teller, worked his way up the chain to become a loan officer, became sort of disillusioned there as well, that he was being pressured to kind of pressure people to take out loans and credit cards and stuff they really shouldn't have or couldn't afford. And so he decided to move on from that. There's an owner of a Ruby Tuesdays store in town that was starting a catering business that wanted him to come and help him stand that thing up. So he did it. And it became very successful to the point where an owner of a Chick-fil-A store noticed and asked him to come do that for him. He did that too, and that too was successful. This guy then recommended him for Chick-fil-A's training program to become a franchise owner. Okay, so I think I talked about that a couple of weeks ago. This is one of those examples where the employers are kind of throwing up their hands and going, the education system is not producing for me what I need. I'm going to do it myself. Okay, so it's a 2-year program where he and a team of about 6 people travel all over the country, about 6 weeks at a time, at 6 weeks at various sites, standing up new Chick-fil-A stores. And they train them up on everything there is to know about how to run a Chick-fil-A store, right? At the end of that training period, you're now eligible to be a franchise owner. And the franchise owners across the country average between $300,000 and $400,000 a year. So he just recently completed the training. He's eligible for his store. He's waiting for an assignment. He's being a little picky about where he wants to live. Can't say I blame him. But if he wasn't so picky, he could already have a store. I'll put it that way. But while he's waiting, he decided to stand up his own consultancy and apply some of the training he got from Chick-fil-A to help other restaurant owners improve the efficiency and effectiveness of their businesses. Of course, you can't sell them Chick-fil-A's secret sauce, right? But some of this stuff is pretty basic that he's doing, and a lot of new business owners have no idea. So he's already got enough clients. He's being paid more than Chick-fil-A was paying him already in the training program. And there's very good potential that that business, self-employment now, remember, that business will pay him more than being a franchise owner, you know, depending on how many clients he takes on and how big the restaurants are. So he punches a couple of tickets or checks a couple of boxes as well. This is our daughter Amanda. You may know, of the 12 people I'm going to talk about here today, she's the only other one besides myself that did the traditional program, right? So she went directly into a college out of high school, went to George Mason right here in town, did 4 years dedicated in school. She lived at home when she was doing that. We paid as she went, so she didn't have to take on any debt, right? And after 4 years, she actually married this fella who turns out is a Mexican national, so she moved to Mexico, and she wasn't working down there. But they came back to the States a few years later, and she went to work self-employed, got her own business, editing books for a publishing company. Okay, so it's a part-time thing she can do at home. We're going to talk more about this in much greater detail in future segments of this series about roles and responsibilities for the guys and gals, right? But she stood up this thing, working from home, doing editorial work, right? But she's been doing that for probably 10 years. But she recently discovered that in Texas, if she gets a Texas certification as a translator, obviously married to a Mexican national who's pretty fluent in Spanish, right? She'll make more money translating than she will editing books. Okay, so it's a 15-week course in Texas, 3 5-week segments, and she already knows the material. She has to pass the test and prove she knows the material, right? And so she gets this certification. So this is one of these examples where the certification is actually worth more than the degree. Now the degree has served its purpose, so I think she could actually make that claim also, that she was one who got what the system promised, right? She went directly through school. She went to work in that field. She had a 10-year run in that field, right, and did pretty good. But come to find out, this certification is actually worth more, right? So she's looking to kind of transition at that stage, right? Now, most of you probably remember he is now training to be one of the nation's finest steely-eyed warriors. But he was our youngest. I graduated from high school, and he worked for a local farmer down there when we were on the farm in Fredericksburg as a farm hand. He also worked with this aerostat company that Justin and I worked with for a little while. And then he enlisted in the Army to go out and save the world from democracy. So he is currently assigned as a Stryker driver in Germany. This is a Stryker vehicle, which is a Harrier kind of a thing. In fact, this is not him, but if you can see the face there, that's where he would be, right? That's his job, is driving this. He calls it his truck. He drives his truck. Some of you might recall that he was also a competitive shooter in high school, right? By the way, the Army didn't teach him to shoot. I did that. Right? And I spent a boatload of money on ammunition to do that. But he did that for about 3 years, and he actually took the national championship, IDPA championship, as a junior in 2017. And the Army has taken notice, okay, that suddenly they figured out that he's shooting better than his instructors. They're looking to move him from being a Stryker driver to being a gunner sometime in the fall, probably. But I put this up here because we're looking at alternatives. The military has long been a place where folks can go and get vocational training, right? There are dozens and dozens and dozens of fields that you can get into in the military where you go and get some basic training in a particular vocation. My father was one of those. They also offer college assistance. So most notably the GI Bill. So if you go and do a regular stint in the services, you're eligible for the GI Bill. They basically pay for your college in return for time in service, right? I mean, that's basically what I did, right? So I pay for service, right? So those are some alternatives, right? And then I saved the best for last. And I have to say that I probably, for purpose of this discussion, again, we're going to have much more discussion on this stuff later on, right? I don't take this phrase too lightly, because I think there is a great deal of success here. That's my personal opinion, right? But this young lady holds an associate's degree from the Northeast Missouri State University as an executive secretary assistant. Now, this is not the almost Dr. PA that we know and love today. This is the clerical assistant, right? So she basically runs doctor's offices. So she takes care of all the charts, all the paperwork, all the insurance, all the appointments, all supplies and all that kind of hogwash, right? But she was very good at her job, and so a couple of the doctors that she worked with actually decided to train her up to be their back office nurse so they didn't have to hire one. Now, today I think that's probably illegal, but back in those days, it was a business, and she wound up being trained up pretty much as a nurse. She was not an RN, never was an RN. You know, Brother Zach always called her his nurse, right? But I will say, particularly for the ladies, so we're looking at some of these transitions. If you're looking to study something, my recommendation is that you pick something that's going to help you in your future endeavor with supporting a family, right? She has always been Dr. Mom to us. Unless we had something serious, we never saw a doctor. She was Dr. Mom. So, and she really got very into the kinds of thing, you know, self-taught with that whole thing, right? So she's pretty well informed on those things, but she also would immerse herself in whatever the family was doing, right? So I know it's not obvious from this picture, other than the fact that she's a real good Navy wife too. But these things that she's cooking are a fruit bar. How many people know what persimmons are? Okay. So we lived out on the farm, and there was a time there when Isaac really got into this foraging thing. So he'd go out in the forest and look for stuff to eat. And he'd bring home